The sun leaned low over the Arizona plains, its dying light stretching long shadows across fields of golden wheat. The air was dry, sharp with the scent of dust and sage. A hawk circled overhead, its cry slicing through the quiet, like a warning only nature understood. Down in the hollow, a single figure worked the land, a man of quiet strength and weathered face, his broad shoulders bent to the rhythm of the earth. Elias Crow had been up since dawn, his calloused hands turning soil as if the land itself were an old friend. Behind him, the small ranch house stood proud despite its years, whitewashed walls, a porch that creaked in the breeze, and the faint sound of humming drifting from within. Mara's voice carried softly through the open window, warm and steady as a hymn. She was hanging freshly washed linen, the fabric fluttering like white wings in the afternoon wind. Elias looked up now and then, just to watch her. It was a habit he'd never broken. After 20 years of marriage, he still found peace in the way she moved, sure, graceful, and alive with the simple joys that made hard living worth it. He straightened, stretching the stiffness from his back, and smiled faintly. "Dinner soon," he called. "Soon as the stew stops simmering," she replied, tucking a strand of chestnut hair behind her ear. "You'll spoil your appetite if you keep eating that jerky before supper." Elias chuckled and tossed the last handful of seed into the soil. "I'll risk it. Can't let the coyotes think they own this place." Mara laughed, that easy sound of home echoing across the open air. For a moment, the world felt untouched, just two souls holding on to what the frontier hadn't yet taken. The wind carried the promise of rain from the south, and Elias breathed deep, tasting life, the kind that comes from honest work and love well earned. By the time the sun touched the rim of the distant buttes, the horizon glowed like fire. Elias finished watering the last trough and leaned his arms against the fence, watching the light fade. He didn't notice the riders at first, just shadows moving slow against the setting sun. But soon, the low thunder of hooves reached his ears, and he turned, squinting into the orange haze. 5 men rode hard down the dirt road. Dust swirled around them like storm clouds, and their faces were half hidden beneath wide hats and scarves. Elias felt something cold tighten in his chest. Strangers didn't ride this far from town without reason. He walked toward the porch. His voice, steady though unease, crept beneath it. "Mara," he said, his tone changing. "Get inside." She turned, the cloth slipping from her hands. "Elias, what is it?" "Go inside," he repeated, his eyes never leaving the riders. They came fast, stopping only yards from the porch. The one in front, a tall man with a black duster and eyes like polished coal, grinned through a crooked beard. "Evenin', farmer," he drawled, swinging down from his horse. "Fine spread you got here." Elias kept his hands loose at his sides. "You're a long way from Bitter Creek." "Maybe," the man said. "Maybe we just got hungry. Maybe our horses are thirsty. Ain't that right, boys?" Laughter broke from the others, harsh, cracked like dry wood. One of them spat in the dirt near Elias's boots. Another looked toward the house. "Smells like supper's on." Elias's jaw tightened. "You can water your horses at the trough and move along." The leader's smile widened. "Oh, we'll help ourselves. Don't you worry. Name's Clint Barlo. You heard of me." Elias didn't answer. He'd heard the name whispered in town. The Barlo gang, killers and thieves drifting from county to county, leaving smoke and graves behind them. Clint's grin turned mean. "Guess that's a yes." He nodded toward the house. "We'll just have a look inside. Maybe the lady of the house can fix us a plate." Elias took a step forward. "You're not setting foot in there." The gang went still. The air seemed to shrink between them, heat rising off the dirt. Clint studied Elias for a long moment, then let out a low chuckle. "You got grit, old man. Shame grit don't stop bullets." The first blow came from the side. One of the men swung his rifle but hard into Elias's ribs. He stumbled, gasping, as another slammed a boot into his back. Mara's scream tore through the air as she burst from the doorway, swinging a cast-iron skillet at the nearest outlaw. It struck his arm with a clang, but he only laughed and caught her wrist. "Get off her!" Elias roared, lunging forward, but the rifle came down again, splitting his lip and sending him sprawling in the dust. The world blurred. The copper taste of blood filled his mouth. Through the haze, he saw Clint grab Mara by the hair, forcing her toward a horse. She fought like wildfire, kicking, clawing, biting. "Hold her still," Clint barked. "Ain't gonna hurt her none, unless this fool don't stay down." Elias tried to rise, but a boot crushed his hand against the dirt. He felt bones shift, pain burning white through his arm. Clint swung onto his horse, pulling Mara up before him. "Tell Bitter Creek their law don't reach this far," he sneered. "And tell your woman she's got my protection now." Elias's voice broke against the dust. "Mara." The horses kicked up clouds as they rode off, the sound fading into the desert like thunder retreating into distance. Then came silence. Only the creak of burning wood from the porch filled the air. One of the lamps had been knocked over during the fight. Flames crawled up the curtains, licking through the open window. Elias dragged himself to his knees, pain screaming through every breath. He tried to reach the doorway, but the heat was already searing. The house caught fast, dry timber, oil, wind feeding it until the sky itself seemed to catch fire. Elias stumbled back, helpless as the home he built, the life he lived, turned to ash before his eyes. When dawn broke, smoke still drifted over the valley. Elias stood among the ruins, his clothes blackened, his face gray with soot. His left hand was bound with a strip of torn fabric. The fire had taken everything, tools, furniture, even the small wooden cross he'd carved for their wedding day. Only the charred remains of a picture frame lay near what had been the hearth. Inside it, the photograph was half burned, but Mara's smile remained, frozen in light and memory. He knelt, the earth cold beneath his knees. His fingers brushed something small in the ashes, a chain, thin and delicate. He pulled it free, wiping away the soot until the silver heart gleamed faintly. Mara's locket. He opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a tiny lock of hair, and the words scratched in faint script, "Forever yours." The wind rose, carrying smoke and sorrow down the valley. Elias bowed his head, the locket clutched tight in his fist. For a long time he didn't move. The morning light crept across the blackened ground, and with it came something colder than grief, something that had slept deep within him since the war. He stood slowly, the air sharp in his lungs. The quiet farmer was gone. What rose from the ashes was a man hollowed by loss, rebuilt by rage. The plains stretched endlessly before him, and somewhere out there rode 5 men and the woman they had stolen. Elias looked toward the horizon where the sky met the dust, the locket glinting faintly in his palm. "I'm coming," he whispered, his voice low, steady, and certain as death. Then he turned his back on the smoldering ruin of his home and walked into the rising sun. The smoke lingered for days, curling low over the valley like a spirit that refused to leave. Elias Crow worked in silence beneath the gray sky, the shovel biting into the blackened ground. He dug until his hands blistered, until sweat streaked the soot on his face. What he buried wasn't just wood and stone. It was every piece of the life he'd built with Mara. The porch where she used to sing, the table where they'd shared bread and laughter, the little wooden cradle he'd made for a child that never came. Each shovelful of dirt was a memory, falling into the dark. When the last of the smoke had thinned, neighbors came from the edge of Bitter Creek. They brought food, sympathy, and hollow words. Widow Jensen pressed his arm, her eyes wet. "The Lord gives, Elias. He'll bring her back safe, you'll see." Elias nodded once, though he saw in her face that she didn't believe it any more than he did. Sheriff Reed Harlan arrived that afternoon on a bay gelding, his star pinned bright against his dusted coat. He was a fair man, older than Elias by 10 years, with a voice like gravel and a heart dulled by too many graves. He tied his reins to a fence post and walked up slow, his eyes scanning the ruin. "Barlo's work," he said quietly. "Same pattern, hit and vanish. My boys tracked him north last week, lost the trail near Red Mesa." Elias stood motionless, his hat shadowing his face. "You'll find them." Harlan sighed, removing his hat. "They're ghosts, Elias. You go after men like that, you don't come back." "I ain't asking what happens to me. I'm telling you anyway," the sheriff said. I've seen what revenge does. It don't bring anyone home. It just digs another grave beside the first one. Elias looked past him toward the horizon. Then I'll dig mine next to hers. Harlan exhaled and rubbed a hand over his jaw. You were a good man once, Crow. Stay that way. Let me handle it. But Elias's silence said everything. The sheriff left soon after, his horse's hooves fading into the distance like the last bit of hope. That night, the wind howled across the open plains, rattling what was left of the barn. Elias sat on the edge of his old cot, staring at the silver locket that hung from a nail on the wall. The firelight flickered across its surface, and for a moment he saw her face reflected in it, soft eyes, wind-tossed hair, the way she used to smile when he came in from the fields. The image wavered, vanished. He rose, moving through the shadows to the far end of the barn. Beneath the loose plank in the floor, buried under a layer of dirt and straw, was an old trunk. His fingers found the iron latch, stiff with rust. The lid creaked open, and the past rose to meet him. Inside lay the tools of a man he'd sworn never to be again. A Winchester wrapped in oilcloth, a hunting knife with a bone handle, and a single silver spur engraved with a faded insignia, *U.S. Cavalry, 3rd Scouts, *. He lifted the spur first, turning it over in his hand. The steel caught the light, and for a heartbeat, he was 20 years younger, riding through Tennessee mud under a rain that never stopped. He could smell the gunpowder, hear the screams that tore through the night. He'd been a scout then, a tracker for men who didn't always deserve to be found. He'd seen the look in dying eyes too many times, watched good men become killers for a cause that lost its meaning long before the war ended. When it was over, he'd walked away from it all, changed his name, bought land, built a life from the quiet. And Mara, she'd saved him from himself. Her laughter had been his absolution. But as he looked at the locket now, the line between past and present blurred. The man he'd buried with that trunk wasn't gone, just sleeping, waiting for the right grave to crawl out of. He unwrapped the rifle. The metal gleamed dull beneath the firelight. His hands moved without hesitation, checking the chamber, testing the action. Every motion was memory. He cleaned it with careful strokes, the smell of oil and iron heavy in the air. Outside, the coyotes began their midnight song, distant and mournful. Elias worked through it, sharpening his knife until the edge caught light like a whisper. He mended his saddle by lantern glow, the needle threading through leather with the patience of ritual. He wasn't rushing. There was no rage in his movements, only purpose, the quiet, deadly calm of a man with nothing left to lose. When dawn came, he stepped outside. The world was washed in pale light, the ground glistening with dew. He strapped on his belt, holstered the knife, and looped the silver spur onto his right boot. It chimed faintly as he moved. He walked to the small grave he'd made near the edge of the field, where the last of the ashes had been laid beneath a wooden cross. No words were carved upon it. The meaning was too large for names. He knelt there, his hat pressed against his chest. "I told you once I'd never pick up a gun again," he murmured. "But I reckon promises don't mean much when the devil walks your land." A breeze stirred, carrying the scent of rain. The soil shifted softly under his knees, and for an instant, he could almost feel her presence, a whisper, a memory of hands brushing his cheek, a voice saying, "Don't do this." He closed his eyes. "They took you from me," he said, his voice breaking. "Now I'll take them from the earth." Behind him, the horizon stretched wide and empty. He could see the faint line of the trail leading west, where the desert swallowed the sky. Somewhere beyond that dust lay Barlo's men, laughing alive, thinking the world forgot the farmer they'd left to die. He rose, slipping the rifle strap over his shoulder. The weight of it settled against him like an old sin reclaimed. By the time the sun climbed high, Elias rode into town. The folks of Bitter Creek stopped what they were doing to watch him pass. Some nodded respectfully, others turned away, whispering his name like a warning. He tied his horse outside the sheriff's office and stepped through the door. Harlan looked up from his desk. His eyes narrowed when he saw the rifle. "You made your choice, then." Elias didn't answer. He placed Mara's locket on the desk. "If I don't come back, see this gets to the church." The sheriff leaned back, the chair creaking beneath him. You sure this is the road you want? Elias's gaze was cold as winter. It's the only one left. For a long moment, neither man spoke. The ticking of the wall clock filled the silence. Finally, Harlan stood and opened a drawer. He pulled out a small tin of bullets and slid it across the desk. I can't stop you, he said quietly, but I won't let you ride blind. Elias nodded once, took the tin, and walked out without looking back. He stopped at the edge of town, where the open plains began. The wind tugged at his coat, carrying the sound of the church bell in the distance. He adjusted his hat, set his jaw, and rode west. The land stretched endless before him. Crimson dust, jagged rocks, a sky too wide to hold mercy. His horse's hooves drummed against the earth, steady and sure. Every mile carried him farther from the man he'd been, closer to the reckoning that waited. Somewhere in that silence, the words of his old commander echoed in his head. A man can bury his past, but the earth never forgets what's under it. Elias looked down at the locket resting against his chest. It felt heavy as fate itself. The wind stung his eyes, and he didn't know if it was dust or tears. He rode on, into the land where the dead whispered and justice came on the barrel of a gun. The land turned red as blood beneath the sun. The Badlands stretched for miles, a maze of jagged cliffs and dry riverbeds that shimmered under the heat, like broken glass. Elias Crow rode through it with the slow patience of a man who'd made peace with pain. His horse's hooves kicked up clouds of dust that clung to his coat, his hat brim low, his eyes sharp on the horizon. The silence out here was different, older, heavier. It swallowed sound and memory alike. Only the wind spoke, whispering through the stone canyons, like ghosts that couldn't rest. He moved like a shadow through that wasteland, following signs most men would miss. A snapped twig, a single hoof print half buried in sand, a scrap of cloth caught on a thorn bush. Once he dismounted and crouched beside a blackened campfire, sifting through the ash until he found what he was looking for. A cigarette, but fresh, the tobacco still fragrant in the dry air. He rolled it between his fingers, his jaw tightening. They were close. By midday his canteen was half empty, and his lips cracked from thirst, but he pressed on. The canyon narrowed ahead, funneling into a stretch of wind-carved rock. From the ridgeline, a hawk wheeled lazily above, its cry echoing down like a warning. Elias dismounted, leading his horse by the reins until he reached the mouth of a dry creek bed. There, tucked into the shade of a crooked mesquite tree, sat a weathered sign painted in peeling letters. Lucy's Well, Water, Supper Shelter. The building beyond it looked like it had grown out of the desert itself. Rough planks, sun-bleached canvas, a porch held together by stubbornness alone. Smoke drifted from a rusted stove pipe, curling into the empty sky. Elias tied his horse to the hitching post and stepped inside. The air was cooler, dim, thick with the scent of coffee and gun oil. Behind the counter stood a woman, tall and sunburned, her silver hair tied back beneath a bandana. Her eyes, sharp as flint, sized him up before he could speak. "You look half dead, mister," she said. "Coffee or water first?" "Water," he rasped. She poured from a clay jug into a tin cup and slid it toward him. He drank slow, letting the coolness cut through the dryness in his throat. When he set the cup down, she was still watching him, arms folded. "You're not just riding through," she said. "You've got that look. Man on a trail, not a journey." Elias met her gaze. "You seen 5 men ride through here? One with a black duster and a scar down his jaw." Her expression hardened. "I seen him 2 days back. Stopped for supplies. Rough lot. One of 'em tried to get fresh till he saw my shotgun." She nodded toward the corner, where a double barrel rested against the wall. They headed east, Coyote Bluff way. Nothing out there but dry bones and worse men. Elias's jaw tightened. "They got my wife." Her voice softened, though her eyes didn't. "I'm sorry." He said nothing. She reached under the counter, pulled out a canteen, and slid it across to him. "Take it. You'll need more than you think. But hear me, mister. Revenge burns hotter than the sun, and it leaves nothing to drink when it's done." He paused, then took the canteen. "Then I'll burn with it." Her sigh followed him out the door. By dusk, the land bled gold and crimson. The air cooled, and the first stars began to shimmer above the jagged ridges. Elias found a narrow pass leading into the heart of the canyons, the trail twisting between walls of stone that glowed red in the dying light. He moved quietly, his horse stepping soft on the sand. He saw the first campfire before he smelled it, a faint orange flicker half a mile ahead, hidden among the rocks. He tethered his horse and moved on foot, crouched low, boots silent on the dust. The years fell away as he moved, every muscle remembering the old lessons. Stay downwind, move with the shadows, breathe through the nose. 2 men sat by the fire, their rifles propped against a fallen log. One of them, younger, cleaned a revolver while the other chewed on jerky, spitting into the dirt between words. "You think Barlo'll share that ransom?" the younger one said. The other laughed. "Barlo don't share nothing. We'll be lucky to get scraps once he's done with that fancy lady." Elias's blood went cold. He slid closer, the knife in his hand glinting faintly under the moon. The older outlaw stood, stretching. "I'm taking a leak," he muttered, walking toward the rocks. He didn't make it back. Elias moved like smoke, one arm around the man's throat, the knife flashing once, quick and silent. The body slumped soundlessly into the sand. The younger one looked up at the rustle, frowning. "Jeb," he called, "you done fall asleep back there?" Elias waited, letting the silence stretch. When the outlaw stood and turned, Elias was already behind him. A single, hard strike with the rifle, but dropped him cold. He dragged both bodies away from the firelight, breathing slow, steady. His hands didn't shake. He'd buried the part of himself that felt guilt long ago, somewhere between the war and the ashes of his home. He knelt beside the unconscious man, searched his pockets, and found a folded map. Scrawled across it in rough pencil was a route marked Bitter Creek, Coyote Bluff. A crude X set at the end of it. Beside it, a note. "Keep her alive till payment." Elias's throat tightened. She's alive. He looked up at the stars, cold and distant, like 1,000 eyes watching the sins of men. The night wind cut across the canyon, carrying the faint smell of horses, smoke, and something else, fear. He took the dead man's coat, pulled it on, and sat near the dying fire. For the first time in days, exhaustion crept in. He stared into the flames, their dance reflecting in his eyes, and thought of Mara's voice, soft and sure, the way it used to fill the rooms of their little house. He could almost hear her humming again, but the sound was fading, drowned beneath the crackle of burning wood and the memory of gunfire. He closed his eyes for a moment, his hand tightening around the locket at his neck. The metal was cool, grounding him in the storm that churned beneath his calm. Every mile he rode, every man he killed, stripped away something he'd once been. What remained was not the farmer of Bitter Creek, not the husband who planted wheat under the morning sun. What rode now was a ghost wearing a man's face, something forged from grief and sharpened by vengeance. When dawn broke, the fire was ash. Elias rose, his coat heavy with dust and blood. He looked toward the horizon where the trail vanished into the canyons. The wind carried a faint echo of laughter, outlaws somewhere ahead, still breathing borrowed time. He saddled his horse and mounted, his silhouette framed against the rising sun. The desert stretched before him, vast and merciless. He nudged the horse forward, the hooves drumming a slow, steady rhythm that matched his heart. Somewhere beyond the rocks, Clint Barlo waited, thinking himself untouchable. But Elias Crow was coming, and he carried with him the quiet fury of a man who'd lost everything but the will to end it. The horizon shimmered in the morning heat, and the dust rose behind him like a trail of ghosts. The moon hung low over Coyote Bluff, pale and watchful, its light spilling across the jagged walls of the canyon. Down below, a campfire crackled, throwing wild shadows against the rocks. The Barlo gang lounged around it, their laughter echoing in the hollow dark. Bottles clinked, cards slapped against makeshift tables, and the smell of whiskey, sweat, and smoke hung thick in the air. They were loud, careless, men who thought the night belonged to them. But it didn't. From the ridgeline above, a lone figure watched, motionless, silent, eyes cold as the desert stone. Elias Crow lay flat against the dirt, his rifle steady, breath controlled. Below, He saw them all. 5 men, the same devils who had taken his wife and burned his home to ash. And there, by the fire, bound to a wagon wheel, was Mara. Her face was smudged with dirt, her hair tangled, but her eyes, those eyes still burned with the same fierce light he remembered. When she turned toward the canyon shadows, some instinct stirred in her. She felt him out there. Elias waited until one of the men wandered off toward the creek, stumbling with a bottle in hand. The fool never saw the glint of metal waiting in the dark. A wire, strung low between 2 boulders, caught his boot. He fell with a grunt, and before the sound could rise, Elias's knife flashed once. The desert swallowed the noise. A few minutes later, the others started to notice the silence. "Where the hell's Cole?" One slurred, staring into the dark. "Probably pissing in the bushes again," another muttered, tossing a card onto the pile. But Clint Barlo frowned, his gut twisting. He was a man who trusted instincts more than cards. His hand went to the revolver at his hip. "Cole don't wander off without a mouthful o' stories," he said, standing slowly. "Light another torch." Before they could, a rifle cracked from somewhere up in the rocks. The bullet tore through the air and slammed into the man with the cards. He dropped without a sound, blood spreading across his shirt. The camp exploded into chaos. Men shouted, guns drawn, eyes wild as they fired into the darkness. Bullets sparked against the canyon walls, ricocheting like thunder. "Up there," one yelled. But Elias was already gone, moving like a ghost through the shadows. He knew the terrain better than any of them could, every ridge, every dry gully, every sound of wind on stone. He used it all. Another gunshot rang out, echoing twice before a third man fell. His lantern tumbled into the dirt, flames spilling across the sand, lighting the camp in a hellish glow. Barlo cursed and kicked the fire higher, his face glistening with sweat. "Come on out, Crow," he roared. "You want your woman? Come take her." Elias crouched behind a boulder, his pulse steady. He could see Barlo now, the black duster, the scar on his jaw, the same sneer he remembered from that night. Rage stirred in him, deep and cold, but he kept it buried beneath control. He adjusted his aim, his finger tightening on the trigger. Then a sound cut through the din, Mara's voice, faint but desperate. "Elias!" Barlo grabbed her by the hair, hauling her upright, pressing his revolver to her temple. "You hear that, farmer?" he shouted. "You pull that trigger, and she's gone before the bullet even hits me." Elias froze, his breath catching. The firelight danced on her face, her fear, her trembling hands bound tight with rope. Every instinct screamed to shoot, but he held still. He'd seen men lose everything because of one mistake. Barlo laughed, his teeth gleaming in the red light. "I remember you," he said. "The farmer who begged like a dog while his wife was taken. You think you can scare me, Crow? You think plowing dirt makes you a man?" Elias stepped from the shadows, rifle lowered. His boots crunched softly against the gravel. The outlaws who were left aimed their guns, but their hands shook. He looked like something carved from stone, his coat streaked with dust and blood, his eyes burning with a calm that terrified them more than fury ever could. "No," Elias said, his voice low, steady, "but burying bastards like you sure does." Barlo fired first, the muzzle flash lighting the night, like lightning. The bullet grazed Elias's shoulder, spinning him halfway around. He dropped the rifle and dove behind a wagon, drawing the knife from his belt. Another shot followed, splintering the wood beside his head. Barlo shoved Mara aside, advancing, his boots grinding into the dirt. "You should have stayed dead, Crow." Elias rose as the outlaw rounded the corner, slashing out fast. The blade caught Barlo's arm, blood spilling down his sleeve. The outlaw roared, swinging his revolver like a hammer, catching Elias across the jaw. The impact sent him reeling, stars bursting in his vision. But he didn't fall. He lunged forward, tackling Barlo into the dirt. The 2 men rolled in the dust, a tangle of fists, steel, and hatred. Barlo's hand clamped around Elias's throat. "You think this makes you righteous?" he spat. "You're just another killer wearing a farmer's face." Elias forced out the words between clenched teeth. "Difference is, I kill for what's already mine." He drove his knife upward. The blade sank deep beneath Barlo's ribs. The outlaw gasped, his mouth falling open in disbelief. The revolver slipped from his grip, thudding into the dirt. Elias twisted the knife once, slow, then let go. Barlo staggered back, clutching the wound. He looked up, his grin trembling into something almost human. "Ain't gonna bring her back," he rasped. Elias stepped close, eyes hollow. "She never left." The gunshot that followed was quiet compared to the storm before it. The sound echoed through the canyon, then faded into the night. Barlo fell, his black coat spreading out like a shadow, finally still. For a long moment, the only sound was the wind. The fire had burned low, flickering against the canyon walls. Elias stood there, blood on his hands, chest heaving, eyes fixed on the man he'd hunted across half the desert. It should have felt like victory. It didn't. He turned toward Mara. She was still kneeling by the wagon, ropes cutting into her wrists. He rushed to her, cutting her free, his hands trembling now for the first time since the fire back home. She looked up at him, tired, frightened, and yet still filled with that fierce grace that had always steadied him. "Elias," she whispered, touching his face. "You came for me." He swallowed hard, voice barely a whisper. "Always." She leaned against him, her breath shaking, and for the first time in days, he felt something break open inside him. Not rage, not vengeance. Something smaller, quieter. The ache of being human again. Above them, dawn began to touch the rim of the canyon, painting the rocks in soft hues of rose and gold. The firelight dimmed as the first light of morning broke through. Elias rose, helping her to her feet. Behind them, the camp was silent, the men who had terrorized the plains now lying still, their laughter gone to dust. He looked down at Barlo's body one last time, then toward the open desert beyond the bluff. The wind carried away the smell of gunpowder and smoke, leaving only the dry scent of sage and earth. Mara's hand found his. "It's over," she said. Elias nodded faintly. "No," he murmured. "It's just begun."